Ukraine's NATO-led allies have announced deliveries of advanced air defense weapons to Kyiv after a spate of Russian missile strikes. This comes as the United Nations General Assembly voted overwhelmingly to condemn Russia's attempts to annex 4 regions of Ukraine. There is more in this report.
The weaponry promised by the UK, Canada, France and Netherlands includes missiles and radars. The United States earlier made a similar pledge. One high-tech system from Germany is already in Ukraine. The pledges come as Ukraine's allies from 50 countries meet at NATO headquarters in Brussels. Kyiv has hailed the summit as historic. Hours after these pledges, Russian shelling hit the southern city of Mykolaiv on Thursday morning, officials said. The city's mayor, Alexander Senvik, said the city was massively shelled around 1 o'clock local time. It has been a particularly intense week in Ukraine, which witnessed some of its heaviest Russian bombardment in months, when more than 100 missiles were launched. At least 19 people were killed on the first day of the strikes, which included central Kyiv. Russian President Vladimir Putin says the strikes were retaliation for an attack on a key bridge linking Russia and Crimea, Ukraine's southern peninsula annexed by Moscow in 2014. Speaking after the Brussels meeting on Wednesday, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said the United States is going to do everything to make sure that Ukrainians have what is required to be effective.
More of the foundational systems that have helped Ukraine succeed on the battlefield. The package includes 4 HIMARS, 16 M777 howitzers, 75,000 more rounds of 155 millimeter ammunition, and more. And we are increasingly posturing ourselves to support Ukraine's defense needs for the challenging months and years ahead.
Russia has repeatedly warned Ukraine's allies against supplying advanced weaponry to Kyiv, stressing this would make them participants of the war that Mr. Putin began on the 24th of February. In the meantime, the United Nations General Assembly has voted overwhelmingly to condemn Russia's attempt to annex 4 regions of Ukraine.
Draft Resolution A/11L/L5 is adopted.
The resolution was supported by 143 countries, while 35 states, including China and India, abstained.
We just saw 143 countries affirm the fundamental principles of the UN Charter. You saw these countries stand up for territorial integrity, they stood up for sovereignty, and you saw these countries stand up for this institution. After Russia's sham referenda and attempted illegal annexations, you saw very few countries stay in their corner. In fact, it was only 5.
Message that speaks to the world. Russia has tried to silence the Security Council. They have not been able to silence the international community, nor the General Assembly, nor the United Nations.
Although symbolic, it was the highest number of votes against Russia since the invasion. Last week in a grand ceremony in the Kremlin, President Vladimir Putin signed documents to make the eastern Ukrainian regions of Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia and Kherson part of Russia. Many African countries have avoided taking sides in the war, which has been seen as a reflection of efforts to maintain long-standing trade ties or of historic non-alignment policies. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said he was grateful to the countries that did support the resolution.
A global affairs analyst Kunle Fallow joins me from Indianapolis to discuss the Russian-Ukrainian war as Moscow continues its offensive against Kyiv. Thank you so much for joining me on World Now. Russia's forces used Iranian-made kamikaze drones to attack the Kyiv and Odessa regions as Moscow continued to punish the country for a truck bomb attack on a bridge to Russia-annexed Crimea. So how desperate do you think Russia is still on to overrun Ukraine?
Well, that's a very interesting question. We're living in very interesting times also. I'd like to remind our viewers, particularly for people that are following very religiously the Russian-Ukraine war, that Mr. Putin just turned 70 years. He had spent 70 years on planet Earth, and this is getting way out of hand, and there seems to be no end in sight in the ongoing war in Ukraine, particularly now that it's been going towards the annexed Crimea region, which was taken over by Russia since 2014. Unfortunately, the Russian president doesn't want to lose face in front of the international community. So he needs more to ratchet up so many things on his corner, and that's why we're seeing what we're seeing. But nonetheless, particularly when we're thinking or hoping if the war is if it's going to be over anytime soon, there seems to be no end in sight, because Putin is still intensifying his efforts to make sure that he achieves his goal and objective, which is to take over Ukraine.
Well, the Speaker of Russia's lower house of parliament threatened an even tougher response to future attacks by the Kyiv regime. But do you think Ukraine has been effectively defending its territory?
Well, the counteroffensive that's been happening lately is something that's very commendable. The U.S., the United Kingdom, Western allies, and now Canada has been sending ammunitions and training and weapons and air defense, which is badly needed by the Ukrainian side. And, help has been coming their way. If it wasn't for the help of the Western allies, Ukraine as a country would have been totally swallowed or taken over by the Russian side, because they have more power compared to the strength of the Ukrainian side. Having said that, it's still ongoing, and Ukrainians are showing some high level of resilience and smartness and intelligence despite their number. And like I said, is very commendable. Then again, the Western allies, the only thing that hasn't happened yet is NATO hasn't completely intervened, because Ukraine haven't been able to formally request for them to join the NATO forces. They haven't been ratified yet. Hence, there seems to be no military boots from international or Western allies. Say the United States, for instance, hasn't been able to bring their people or military people in the battlefield, but they're still helping in supplying ammunitions and trainings for the Ukrainians in order to compete, or to not even competition this time, to fight for their survival and fight for their country of Ukraine. So it will continue, because they've always stated their support, unwavering support for the Ukrainian side, and that's why it's still ongoing.
Yeah, makes sense. But Putin just met with Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan on the sidelines of a regional summit in Astana, Kazakhstan. Are you hopeful that the meeting could lead to an extension of agreement that led to the resumption of Ukrainian grain exports and also allowed Russia to ship fertilizers?
When I looked at the news of the Russian-Turkey meeting, it was unfortunate, because what I was looking at was finding a lasting solution, or finding a resolution in an amicable, a dialogue, diplomatic way of resolving this crisis. Unfortunately, one of the ministers of the Russian side is saying that there wasn't no discussion as to ways to diplomatically resolve the crisis, the war ongoing in Russia and Ukraine. So now they're all us just talking about how the Nord Stream, or the gas and will be, traveling not from the Nord Stream 1 and 2 anymore, but this time how to channel that product from Turkey to the European side. And this is just business, and it's monetary reasons, and he needs all the funds he can get to continue to finance this very, very expensive war. So unfortunately, there wasn't any talk again about how to resolve this crisis. So yes, this is very concerning.
Well, we'll see how things continue to pan out at the end of the day. Global affairs analyst Kunle Falowo, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.